Hi, welcome to Swishing Mindsets. This is Anuradha, and today we're speaking to Minakshi Dewan, author of The Final Farewell Understanding the Last Rites and Rituals of India's Major Faiths, published by HarperCollins. Hi, Minakshi, how are you?
Hi Anuradha, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good and very interesting theme of the book. So can't wait to start talking about it. Uh, so first of all, you mentioned your journey and how it led you to this, but could you talk about it yourself, in your words?
I would say it's been a really interesting journey of learning and unlearning. The journey started in 2019 when I performed my dad's last rites as a chief mourner. I performed Papa's last rites without understanding the deeper meanings behind the rituals. But I came across some instances while conducting his Antim Sanskar which were intriguing. Like I remember a death worker who always, his eyes were always red. He looked as if he is intoxicated, and there was a slur in his voice. Then I remember talking to the funeral pandit on the 11th day of performing rituals. Then meeting the tirth purohit in Varanasi. These were the instances which were very intriguing for me, and but there were many things which were unanswered, which I had to unravel, so they stayed with me. And then came the pandemic in 2019 and 2020, and so then, death work came to the center stage. There were horrid scenes of neglect, there was enormous death toll. That's when the idea of this book was conceived. I understood there was lot to be uncovered. There were many puzzle pieces which were scattered and which had to be put together and which had to be solved. And that's when I started researching on the book, and the idea was conceived.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned that the priest had red eyes. I'm just curious, did you find out why?
Not the priest, the death worker.
The death worker. Okay.
Because he was intoxicated, he was consuming something, because it's not easy managing the dead bodies. So, in order to deal with that exhaustion, mental and emotional exhaustion, many times I later on discovered that death workers either consume alcohol or other substances to overcome that burden, or to deal with that burden, emotional and psychological, or the physical burden of dealing with corpses or dead bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be tough. One can imagine. And you've also mentioned the different, the tirth, purohit, etc. So in your book, you've gone by the hierarchies that it's like a hierarchy that exists. Because, there's the maha brahmin that who does the 11 days. There's the tirth purohit. Then there's the nai or the barber, you said, who plays a, huge role.
Right.
So could you talk about those hierarchies?
Yeah, it was very interesting because, as I mentioned before, I was talking to a funeral pandit who are called by different names. They're called Mahabrahmins, they're called Mahapatras. So I was talking to this pandit on the 11th day. So I asked him, do you also perform other rituals, other life cycle rituals? I was very intrigued. And his answer was, नहीं नहीं नहीं, we don't perform other life cycle rituals. हम सिर्फ मृत्यु से जुड़े काम करते हैं. We only do work related to death or last rites. I was very intrigued, and then while I started researching on the book, I wanted to understand uh, this aspect. And that's when I started looking at ethnographic work and my discussions with different purohits and mahabrahmins. When I went to Nigambodh Ghat, and then when I went to Varanasi, I learned more about these hierarchies. I understood that mahabrahmins, or these purohits, are involved in the last rites. Other life cycle rituals are performed by other Brahmins, but especially on the 11th day, they accept gifts of food on behalf of the dead person. It is believed that the deceased will receive these gifts through the Brahmin in the next world. And it was really interesting when I found that on this day they are very, very important. And it is believed that the session of the soul will not happen until and unless you perform those 11th day rituals and you feed these mahabrahmins. So those hierarchies still exist to some extent, I would say. And these are also lower order Brahmins. And because they accumulate pap by accepting gifts in the name of the dead person. And so there are other ritual specialists whom I met during this journey. And Tirth Purohit in Haridwar was another ritual specialist whom I met. They generally assist the families in immersing the ashes and performing the shraddh, but their very important role is in maintaining the death registers for the families. These are called vahis. So when I went to immerse my father's ashes in Haridwar, I went and visited our Tirth Purohit. His name is Mahendra Gautam, and it was quite an interesting experience when I saw the records of my family written in a very special ink, and I could see the records from 1941 written by my great grandfather, and it was quite interesting seeing those things and visiting the Tirth Purohit and to understand that these things still exist. It was quite interesting in that sense. And then
Yeah,
when you are asking me about the knives, they still perform when you go to Haridwar or any of these pilgrimage sites. You would see them shaving the heads of the people who've come to perform the shraddh or other ceremonies. But they have their role in other rituals also, like if you see Mundan ceremonies. And so they play role, knives play role in all life cycle rituals. But yes, their role is crucial in death rituals also.
yeah, and like you said, this is a lower order Brahmin. But you also said that it's evolved kind of, and the family priest takes over the duties, and the last day at times is taken over by the Maha Brahmin.
It's very interesting that a Kul Purohit can perform life cycle rituals as well as assist you with your funeral rites, but they would not accept the 11th day dan, which is only accepted by a Mahabrahmin. They will not accept that dan. While having said that, they can still assist you in your funeral rites uh, and an immersion of ashes, but not accepting those gifts on the 11th day.
Yeah, and even your experience in Haridwar was very interesting that you've written and you just talked about. And apparently it goes down generations, right? And
Right, right.
yeah, yeah.
So when I went there, it was very interesting. My sister was there, and my entire family was there. My aunt was there, and it was really, really interesting to see those records written, as I said before, written by my great grandfather, and uh, they came from Jhelum, which is now in Pakistan, in 1941, and those records were still intact, and I was quite intrigued and very happy to see those records still alive and intact.
Yeah, and yeah, on pen and paper. I mean, it's just very,
Right,
very interesting. Yeah.
right. So, this
But it's
is very.
being digitized, you said, right? Yeah.
It's been microfilmed, but of course, when I spoke to my Tirth Purohit, he denies all of that, and he says that they still maintain these records and they don't want to share their these records, these vahis, because they think that they are the keepers of these vahis and they derive lot of power from that. So but yes, with changing times things will get digitized and these professions may change, or a small they may transit eventually. So that's something which one will have to wait and watch.
Right. And you're talking about these technicians. It's an interesting word, uh, because they are actually technicians, ritual
Right,
technicians. So
right.
you've spoken to some, interviewed a lot of different from across faiths. So some of them which I found very interesting. I mean, one was the priestess, the Hindu priestess, uh, and I forget her name. And then there's a Parsi priest,
Manisha Shetty. Her name was Manisha, Dr. Manisha Shetty.
Dr. Manusha Shetty, right? And then there's a Parsi priest, Framroze Mirza, who was very outspoken. Even in what you've written, he's very outspoken, talking about introducing the cremation services for his community, which a lot of people were against. And I think and you've written that, he also did the cremation finally for the lawyer who opposed him in court over this. So,
Right, right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
It was a very interesting conversation when I spoke to Priest Mirza. I found his number and then I contacted him, and he was very candid when he told me about this entire, transition of from performing sky burials at or to performing cremations. It was very interesting, and it was it was hilarious when he compared himself to Ahilya Bai Holkar. He said, "I am a revolutionary. Look, when the rituals came under scanner, the traditional rituals, I started offering cremation services. I am not scared of anyone." And he there were lawsuits filed against him, and he faced a lot of problems. He was ostracized by the community, but he went on, and he's still offering cremation services in Varli, and at electric crematorium in Varli, and it is commendable that he's still doing it to people who are interested in this kind of funerary rites.
Yeah, and the Parsi rites also you've written, it's very interesting. So could you talk a little bit about that as well?
So Parsis don't bury or cremate their dead. They leave their dead at towers of silence, and the bodies are consumed by vultures and crows. So this is what. So the body is considered impure after a certain point, and it is not even touched by the family members, and it is considered polluting after a point. So it shouldn't be intermingled by with fire, different elements like fire, earth, or water. That's why it is left on towers of silence to be devoured by vultures and crows. So this is what Parsis follow and they believe in, and which is different from other religions where burial and cremations are most commonly practiced. But sky burials are also practiced by other communities, some of the Buddhist communities also follow sky burials. But towers of silence is very unique to Parsi community.
Yeah, but I guess vultures, I mean, there are no more vultures, so yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
the
challenge.
vulture population got extinct, so it was
Yeah.
challenging, and that's when our Framroze Mirza had to start offering cremation services to the community when they found that the vulture population was close to extinct and the bodies were lying and rotting at the towers of silence. So that's when he started offering these services. So yes, environment is another important aspect that I've looked at in the book, how environment is impacting, and we have impacted environment, which is leading us to change or see our last rites in a new light.
Right. And you're talking about how they consider the body impure once, there's the person is no longer alive. So across faiths, you've mentioned how they look at the body. It's different rituals, right? So could you
Right,
talk a
right.
little bit about that? Like, in I mean, you can tell us, yeah. And it's also the concept of heaven and hell and things like that. You find that everywhere in Christian uh, beliefs and in the Parsi, in the Islamic one, there's a lot of heaven and hell happening, burning fires of hell. There's Jannat and Jahannam, you know.
Right.
So yeah,
There are
which
a lot of
it also
interesting,
it sets
yes,
the principles for living a life as well.
right.
Yeah,
So what I found was very interesting is that your beliefs around death and last rites and rituals are interrelated. So there are certain communities who believe in resurrection after death, who believe in the final judgment, like the Islamic tradition. Among Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs, we believe in the cycle of life and death. So there are different understandings based on which we also perform our last rites and rituals. So among Muslims and Christians, we bury the dead. But there is a transition in that also. And among Hindus and Buddhist and Jain and Sikh communities, we cremate the dead, and open fire cremations are more preferred. But I saw a lot of overlaps, like washing the dead is common across religions. How shrouding is done and how we wrap the bodies is also is different, but is done across religions. And there are also pre-death rituals that we follow. Reading of scriptures is considered good across religions. And then there are other aspects like we don't cook. These are more cultural aspects. We don't cook food in the house. The and the community offers food after death, which is common across religions. And then how we carry the dead, how the funeral procession is conducted is also it's also very specific for every religion. But yes, carrying the body by people is considered good. So many people come forward to what we call kandha dena in Hindus. Uh, uh, so these are the commonalities we see, and there are also differences. So it's very interesting how different religions have different aspects. Excessive mourning, for instance, is not considered or appreciated across religions. The aggressive expression of lamenting is not appreciated. So these are overlaps, and there are differences. So which makes it even more interesting, the study of last rites and rituals.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, you mentioned uh, it's like in Sikhism, it's a celebration that the body's on its, the soul is on its way, right? And in a lot of faiths, I think you found that as well.
Right. The death is in Sikhism. If you see the Ramkali Sad, where there are where it is mentioned how one should approach death. So it is seen that it is not the time to lament, it is the time to celebrate, because your soul is going to merge with the Supreme. So you should celebrate that instead of wasting your time in traditional mourning or lamenting. So it's very interesting how Anand Sahib is read during Sikh last rites and rituals, and it is read across life cycle rituals among Sikhs. So I was talking to one Granthi, and he said that if life is Anand, then death is Anand too, because you have to celebrate these souls merging with the supreme powers.
Yeah, and also I feel like all these rituals really support the people as well. When you're grieving and you're told it's a celebration, it kind of sets the tone for what's to
Right,
follow, and then you feel like, okay, the person's had a fulfilling life, and now he's on his way to meet the maker. So there's a lot of solace to be derived through
right.
these
And life
beliefs.
cycle rituals also give you a platform to grieve. When people come together, community members come together, they find it very comforting. Or when you give a ritual bath to your family member, when you decorate your family member, or make them wear clothes in a certain way. It's very comforting for the family members when you tie their hair in a certain way or you comb their hair in a certain way. I think it's very comforting for the family members to do that on their own. And in India, it's still a very family and a community affair, the last rites and rituals.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk to you about the Aghori belief, and you spent time at the Baba Kina Ram's ashram in Varanasi, and this concept of non-duality, and I think they have a different system, right, of last rites.
So it's very interesting when I went to Baba Kina Ram's ashram, and I experienced something which was very very interesting. When I went there, I saw that the ashes of the dhuni. the eternal fire which keeps burning at the ashram. The ashes from that fire are smeared by people and consumed by people to cure different kinds of ailments, like leprosy, infertility, and these are seen as these are seen. There's some kind of stigma attached to these things. So you will see that people from all backgrounds, all kind of class and all kind of caste backgrounds come here, and they smear these ashes. And the wood which is used in the dhuni is actually procured from the cremation grounds, which is considered polluting otherwise, but here it is considered healing, those ashes. So you see that in one place you will see them as polluting, and in another place you will see them as healing. And the kund in which people take bath, who suffer from different ailments and come here and take bath, uh, people with varied kind of health problems take bath, and there are some people who come here for a spiritual healing also take bath in the same water. So you see that it's kind of equalizing in that sense, is what I learned. Later on I also looked at some ethnographic works which have been done around this aspect of healing at Baba Kina Ram's ashram. So it was quite interesting in that sense.
Yeah, it is a certain balance.
Right, it is a balance. It is a balancing thing, I would say.
Yeah. So the last rites also differ within a faith as well, right? Like you said, for children and for also during the pandemic, we saw a lot, people had to skip actually. There was no choice.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
There was a compulsion because of which people had to skip certain rituals, which are very close to us. For instance, during pandemic, the Antim Darshan, which is considered very crucial among across religions, had to be skipped. Shrouding had to be skipped. Washing of the body had to be skipped. So these were the rituals which are very close to us, uh, uh, had to be skipped during the pandemic because of the guidelines from the government and WHO guidelines. So it was quite difficult for the families to witness a their family member was going. B, they couldn't grieve in a way which was comforting for them.
What are some lessons that you think, one can learn from the pandemic? One is, of course, I don't know if it's a pandemic phenomenon, but, one saw a lot of women also step up and take the lead, when it came to cremation and funeral services, which one didn't see otherwise. And you mentioned, like in Sikhism, it is not said women can, men can, it's everybody's equal. But you said in practice, you don't know how much of it really happens. And even in other faiths, it's becoming common now. So did that go up in the pandemic or and otherwise as well?
So, I was a chief mourner during my father's last rite. So I was very intrigued if, other women are also performing or participating in a similar way. So I wrote a Facebook post where I welcomed other people to share their stories if they were comfortable. So there were a lot of messages I received in my inbox, and my friends and uh, acquaintances were willing to share their stories. And it was quite interesting to understand that how these trends are slowly changing, and women are coming forward in performing the last rites of their family members beyond the traditional mourning role that they played, like lighting the pyre and immersing the ashes, and many other rituals I saw women. So things are changing. I would say that there are cultural and regional differences. There'll be differences in urban and rural areas, but yes, these things are slowly changing. And I also, during the pandemic, I saw young girls. I heard many stories and I interviewed these young girls, and I have featured their stories in the book, who have come forward and assisted in performing the last rites for the families when the death workers were already strained, and death work had become difficult. So these people, these women stepped up, and young girls, 19 and 20-year-old girls, stepped up and not only carried the bodies but also lit the pyres and comforted the families during the last rites. Many of them are studying, are science students, and some of them are not science students. So these are very interesting things that I noticed during the COVID, and I understood that how death work gained prominence during the pandemic, and we understood that we cannot ignore death work, and we need to. I don't know how far will we remember these lessons, but I think these are important lessons that we need to give importance to death work.
Yeah, and you've also, like, one of the anecdotes that you shared in your book, it's also that, if it's not just that, the sun can't make it or there is no sun, even in the uh, your friend, I think you've written about, she took the lead because she was the primary caregiver for her father.
Right.
So she felt very comfortable and it came naturally for her to take the lead. And even the priest encouraged her to do so.
Yes, yes. So she's my friend's very dear friend, and she wanted to share her story and her narrative in the book. She said that she was the primary caretaker for her father. So her brothers were there, but then she was the pandit saw that she was more comfortable, she was more forthcoming when it came to performing the last rites, and she was the one who performed everything for her father, from carrying the body to lighting the pyre, and other acts were also immersing the ashes later on. And so she happily did that, and nobody intervened, and everybody was happy that she is there to perform the last rites, and the brothers were also happy. So it was a very interesting narrative in that sense.
Yeah, it came naturally to everybody.
It came naturally. Nothing was forced. Nothing was, pre-decided. So it kind of came very naturally. Yes.
Yeah. And you've also said that lessons from the pandemic and death workers got active, etc. So you've said that in the US, you've quoted a Hindu Business Line article which says that in the US it's a $20 billion industry, right? And
Right.
in
Right.
India, it's worth around 2.5 billion. US
Right.
is billion, right? 20 billion. So, and it's 2.5 billion. So that is the scope, really.
Right.
Yeah, and
So
so yeah, so you've also talked a lot about you've talked about Christians already. There is a trend for, assigning it to a funeral home or the church really that takes over, and picking the coffin and the all those things. There are elaborate coffins also you've mentioned. Then there's the Kashi Moksh Foundation. You've said they share videos, they share a lot of things. Very efficient. It all
right.
sounds. So what do you think is the future really, of funeral directors, professional agencies? So do you see that trend happening? Everybody's got so
So,
busy, nobody even knows actually rituals anymore.
right. So I was talking to a funeral director, and he told me that we don't even know where the nearest crematorium or the burial place is. So we'll eventually depend on funeral directors or these organizations to help us or assist us during the last rites. So I this line stayed with me when he said that. But I still feel that during the pandemic, these organizations or these funeral directors, they gained more prominence because people understood that the family and the relatives were not around to assist you in performing the last rites, and many times people were quarantined. So that's when they started getting more, I would not say popular, but they started gaining more prominence during the pandemic. And now people have started to understand that these services exist in India. The last rites and rituals, or this industry, if I may call it, it's a more unorganized sector. So there is a pandit, and then there is somebody who will provide you with the ambulance service. There is cremation ground which will a crematorium which will help you with a mobile mortuary. So these things are more unorganized, but now with these funeral directors coming in, I think these services will become more organized, but it will take a long time because in India, last rites and rituals are still seen as a very family and a community affair. And to what extent will they be able to monetize these services in India is something which one will have to wait and see.
Yeah, so there already exist certain agencies, right? So what
Right,
if,
they do.
yeah, yeah. So could you talk about some of them, the work they do and the demands that they get from, I mean, lack of a better word, clients, really?
Right, right. So they offer all kinds of services like arranging these, vans for transporting the bodies, to arranging pandits, arranging for instance, in Varanasi, this organization helps people. If you send them the remains or the mortal remains or the ashes, they'll help you uh, immerse the ashes in the Ganga ritually, and then they will also recite mantras. They'll perform Pinddan for you or the Shraddh ceremony for you. They'll perform these rituals online and help you be a part of these rituals. If not physically, then technologically or virtually, you can be a part of these rituals. So these are then there are repatriation services which are available. Then there are other more advanced services like you can order keepsakes of your loved ones. You can have them framed, or you can get it. You can get a keepsake uh, 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 in a form of a diamond, or something like that for the remembrance of your loved one. These things are also in trend these days, and the coffins which are ordered can be more elaborate. In India, we still use teak wood or rosewood, which is more expensive, but the regular plywood is still more common because there are variations across classes. So yes, they provide all kinds of services. You can think of arranging prayer meetings, elaborate prayer meetings, fancy prayer meetings, to basic ones. So there are all kinds of services which are in offering, I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll only go up. It's a service that's required, I'm sure.
And there is a demand for these
It's a
kind of.
demand, and I think people want to give a grand send-off, you know.
Right, because there are so many emotions attached to last rites and rituals. It's also because you want to go a step further when it comes to giving a nice farewell to your loved one. So there are a lot of emotions attached to last rites as well.
Yeah. And bringing the community together, the family together, for a final farewell, really. And so finally, Meenakshi, when you started the book, and now that it's done and we're talking about it, how has the experience been for you personally?
It's been, as I said there at the beginning of the interview, that there's been a lot of learning and unlearning. When I started working on the book, we were in the middle of the second wave of the pandemic, and I started interviewing people, and I understood how death workers had done their job really well. They were overburdened and they were overstressed. So I understood that how death work is such an important public health work. That was a big learning for me, and it taught me so much more about life than death. This research and this journey, I met a lot of interesting people, and I understood that how there's so much discrimination when it even comes to last rites. We all know about there is so much of caste discrimination and gender discrimination when it comes to many different aspects of life. But yes, there is so much discrimination when it comes to last rites and how it is associated, the performance of last rites or the workers, the caste or the community they come from, was something which I learned during this research process, and it was quite an eye opener for me in that sense.
Yeah, the Kinnar community also you've mentioned that, it's still ambiguous. There's no clarity about how I mean, for everything else, there's a detailed instructions and rituals and everything.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
was very interesting when I approached the community members. It was very obvious that they didn't want to talk about their last rites and rituals. So all I could gather was through the existing literature or the existing research, or some newspaper clips or some interviews for magazines is what I could gather, and that is what I present in my chapter on last rites and rituals of the Kinnor community. So I think, but what is important is that every community member should be given space for performing and their right to perform their last rites and rituals. If there should be equality in that as well, is what I feel is more important than only understanding last rites and rituals, or what is being done or what is not being done. It is also important to understand who are the actors who are involved in this last journey or the final farewell that we call.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Minakshi, and congratulations on the book. So I've been through it. It's lovely. Lots to learn from it.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, and I'm glad you found it interesting and intriguing to have me here and have a discussion with me on this morbid yet important topic.
Uplifting topic. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.